So my name is Gabriele Rause, and I work, of course, at Monticello, where I enjoy my life. So those are my vacation when I go to work at Monticello. I also do a little consulting. I occasionally help my son in what they are doing in the vineyard and the winery. And of course, I'm getting a little bit old, so I'm not very useful anymore. But I like to think that sometime I can solve some problem. You know, I'm Italian, so in Italy, everybody who is involved in agriculture produce grapes and eventually produce wine. It's part of our daily food, a glass of wine. Not only it helps your diet, but I think it really helps your brain to function properly. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how that works.
My name is Courtney Jonas. I'm the general manager of the Downtown Grill here in Charlottesville, Virginia. So my sister and I were lucky. We visited Italy. Gosh, this was probably almost 10 years ago. And we did one of those trips where we just traveled all over. We didn't know what we were doing, but that's what really cultivated, I think, our love of wine.
Name is Andrew Hodson, Hodson. I and my wife own Veritas Winery. We're cultivating a total of 100 acres of vines at the moment. We make 20,000 cases of wine a year. So people ask me why I'm in the wine industry, and I usually say, well, it's because my family dates back hundreds of years in England where we made wine. But of course that's not true. Like most of the people in America, I came from the UK, from England, and my initial work in America, well, I was in medicine, and I gave up medicine 17 years ago. But I'm as much a product of the American dream as anyone, because I'm an immigrant and I've benefited from the opportunity that I've had in America, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think a lot of the people you'll find in the Virginia wine industry are in fact French, Italian, some English, but there's a lot of people from Europe still invested in making wine in Virginia, and I think that's a good thing.
Thomas Jefferson was a person who liked research. So whatever he was doing, he was not throwing himself into what he was doing. He said, let's find out what works, what doesn't work, right? And of course, he spent 5 years in France. He understood that America would have become very important for the rest of the world. And actually, he traveled to France and traveled, through the northwest of Italy, and he found that viticulture was a very important thing. So when he came back, he experimented with viticulture. He realized that the soil in Virginia is very poor, so he realized that it makes sense to go in the direction of a crop that loves poor soil. They produce wonderful fruit when they are in poor soil. They are like a family when there are some difficulties and they are able to solve them. They are going to have wonderful children. If the life is easy, it's not going to work the same way. But I love that he tried 10 times to grow grapes. Actually, I remember when in 1983 they asked me to graft the 24 variety that Jefferson planted in 1907. One of them was Muscat of Alexandria, and I said, this will never grow. This is a variety which grows in Sicily, Calabria, north of Africa. But they said, well, graft it anyway, we will see what happened, and we will write down that he died. And I grafted it, and it took 20 years for the first vine to die, for the first Muscat of Alexandria to die. That meant to me that that was a perfect spot. He was here for 83 years, and it was quite unusual at the time to live so long. But the combination of good food and good wine make it to last a long time.
It's just kind of neat to just be able to try something and pair it with food, because wine tastes different with food than it is if you're just tasting it on your own.
Good food needs good wine, you you cannot appreciate beautiful food without a glass of wine. It's really a companion, and I give you a very simple example. The wines are always rich in acidity. Some are more rich, some are less rich. But the moment you have acidity, you are able to extract the flavor of what you eat, right? And it's a real discovery for some people, you know, to enjoy a certain food and then find out that with a glass of wine is even better.
Charlottesville is a really locally driven town. There's all these campaigns for eat local, buy local, be local, and not just with wine, not just with beer, it's with produce, it's with even meat. I think the benefit for local is then you can go out and you can visit the vineyard. So, you know, you can have a bottle of wine here with dinner and then go out to the vineyard, and it's 15-20 minutes away, and then you can see their process, which is kind of nice. Every time I have friends, family, anybody come into town, we do the wineries.
When we first moved to Virginia, the quality of Virginia wine was, you know, not so great. What has happened is that the people that have come into Virginia have a much greater knowledge of what they're doing, have a much greater understanding, are able to bring in those consultants that know what they're doing, so the standard of wine has improved dramatically.
And wonderful, you know, winemaker coming from France and being willing to share their knowledge. And, you know, I find interesting that when I meet a new winemaker, if he comes from a family which made wine for you know, few generations, you will end up to learn something every time. So it's beautiful how this you know, way to work together is really a wonderful way to live.
And when my wife and I arrived, it was the 50th winery in Virginia, and you probably know that since that time, in 17 years, the number of wineries has quintupled. So we've got almost 250 wineries in Virginia right now.
It was an interesting thing because yes, there was I would call it American elite who had been traveling a lot and they knew about wine, but the rest had no idea what it was and didn't even want to deal with it. You know, I couldn't convince them to open the bottle and to get the cork off and try the wine. So it was an interesting beginning.
Charlottesville is one of a huge destination wedding spot, so people love to get married at a vineyard because why not? It's beautiful. There's a lot of like really cool like B&Bs right on the property. And so we are lucky enough to hold the rehearsal dinner with us, and often they choose Virginia wine. Friends and family are coming from all over the country, sometimes the world, and they always, almost, I would say 95% of the time, choose a Virginia wine to pour for the group for dinner. And it just goes so well with whatever they choose. It just pairs so well with the food that they're eating.
Well, I think it's booming because the industry itself is concentrating on making quality wine. Now, I told you earlier that the wine is as good as the grapes that are grown in the vineyard. And it's the vineyard site that is crucial to the quality of the wine. Industry that's impacting the world stage in as much as we compete with international brands, and we do as well as any in these competitions. So if a competition is a measure of quality, then we're able to produce world quality wine, but not at a very great scale. The big problem facing the Virginia industry is the lack of raw product, the lack of grapes to make wine. The industry is doing very well. We're able to make good quality wine, but there isn't enough supply. 20
different Virginia wines on our list, predominantly red. We do have some great whites too.
In Virginia, the climate is pretty much the same as Bordeaux. We get the same rainfall. You know that Bordeaux is a very prestigious region for growing grapes, probably the best in the world. And there's a wine in France called Petrus. And Petrus is made with a grape called Merlot. And we grow Merlot, and the climate here is roughly the same as it is in France. We get the same amount of sunshine. The only real difference is that here it rains in the summer, whereas in Bordeaux it only rains in the winter. But by and large, we've got the same conditions of growth, we've got the same amount of sunshine, and we grow Merlot. And I can make a Merlot in Virginia, and it sells at $220 a bottle. And the same wine from that particular region in France goes for $1,300 a bottle. You know, what is the difference between the quality of the Petrus in France and the quality of the wine in Virginia? Well, what it boils down to, it's the uniqueness of the flavor of the wine, right? So when you grow a particular grape in a particular soil, in a particular place in France, it comes up with this unique flavor. And all those factors that determine the unique flavor, the French call the terroir. It's a word that there's no real English equivalent to. It really means all those factors that bear upon the growth of the vine that produces the grape. So we've got a very similar terroir in the sense of the soil, the weather, and the grape. But the two wines are very different. And it's the uniqueness of a wine that determines the market.
Well, you know, I came from a culture where to solve a problem, the best thing to do is to sit around the table and have good food and good wine. And then you will figure out how to solve the problem. If you don't have good food and good wine, you will never solve the problem. You can have another dinner and then another dinner, but you will never solve the problem. So I think it's beautiful how America is changing. It's beautiful how quickly it changed, right? Because you know, I find that, you know, the country where I come from, things don't change so easily. But I love how the Americans see that something is better and they go in that direction without hesitation. So, I mean, it's a beautiful country, so it has been an unbelievable adventure for me to come here and to deal with what I have to deal with.
From my standpoint, wine is a reflection of society. And I think European society, you know, hundreds of years of being brought up with wine, that you wouldn't eat a meal without wine. Completely different societal norm. People have a different engagement with wine, have a different respect for wine. You know, wine is much more part of how people were brought up. It just hasn't happened in America. It's been dropped from American society. But I think it's true that there is an increasing acceptance of food and wine as being a value proposition, whereas wine on its own is not. Food on its own is just food on its own, but wine and food is a different value proposition.